Hello, friends, and welcome to a fantastic science fiction story. In this episode, I'll be telling you the tale of Robert, a human, and Scarlett, an alien princess. Grab your coffee and enjoy the story. Happy viewing. The alien princess mocked the human man, but her mother stopped her, saying, "He will be your husband." The Grand Hall of Aureli was built from a single sheet of grown crystal, coaxed over 3 centuries from a seed the size of a plum, and it had been designed for one purpose above all others, to make a visitor feel very small. Light did not simply illuminate the place. It lived there, drifting in slow, luminous shoals near the vaulted ceiling like fish that had forgotten the sea. The floor was a mirror. The walls remembered every word ever spoken against them and gave back the faintest silver echo, so that even a whisper arrived somewhere with interest attached. Into this cathedral of intimidation, on the evening in question, walked a man in a brown coat. The coat was the first problem. It was, by any honest reckoning, a perfectly good coat. It had buttons. It had kept the man warm on a colder world than this one. But among the Aurelian nobility, who wore garments spun from filaments so fine they seemed less like cloth than like a rumor of cloth, in colors that had no names because no one had ever needed to insult them before. The brown coat sat upon Robert's shoulders like a confession. He did not appear to know this. That was the second problem, and by far the more interesting one. "Observe," said Princess Scarlett from the dais in the tone of a naturalist presenting a specimen. "The envoy of Earth has dressed for the occasion." The court laughed. They laughed the way courts do, which is to say a beat too quickly and a shade too loud, each noble measuring their mirth against their neighbors to be sure they had not laughed too little. Their ears, long, tapered, elegant things that swept back from their temples like the fins of something built for speed, pricked and turned, catching the amusement of the room and passing it along. Scarlett's own ears were the finest in the hall, which she knew, and which she had arranged her hair specifically to advertise. Robert inclined his head. "I did," he agreed. "I even ironed it." This was not the correct response. The correct response, the one Scarlett had been building toward all evening with the care of an architect, was fluster. A stammer, the small hot flush of a lesser creature realizing its lesserness. Instead, the human had said, "I even ironed it," with the mild pride of a man who had, in fact, ironed it. And now the laughter curdled slightly at its edges because no one was entirely sure whom it belonged to. She descended a step. She was very good at this. She had, over the past hour and a quarter, remarked upon the envoy's plain manners, his plainer face, his provincial habit of looking people directly in the eye as though eyes were for looking rather than for lowering, and the truly astonishing audacity of a soft, short-lived, single-hearted mammal from a backwater star presuming to stand among the oldest bloodlines in the reach of the galaxy. Each remark had landed. Each had drawn its tribute of laughter, and each had broken against the man like water against a stone that had frankly seen worse weather than this. "Tell me, envoy," she said, circling now, her gown trailing light behind her like a comet that had decided to be tasteful about it. "On your world, do they teach you to speak to royalty? Or do you simply arrive and hope?" "Mostly we hope," said Robert. "It's cheaper than lessons." A young lord near the front made a sound like a stifled sneeze, and was immediately, murderously ignored by everyone around him. Scarlett smiled. It was a beautiful smile, and it did not reach her eyes, which was its whole design. She had one final remark loaded and ready, the sort of remark that ends careers and possibly digestion, and she turned toward her mother's throne to deliver it with the proper flourish, because cruelty, to be perfect, requires an audience of the person you most wish to impress. Her mother was not laughing. The Queen of Aureli sat very still upon a throne that had been carved to look like it was in the act of blooming, and she was watching her daughter with an expression that had no laughter anywhere in it, and had not for some time. It was the kind of stillness that spreads. The nobles nearest the throne felt it first, a cooling, a settling, the collective held breath of a room that has just noticed the temperature drop. Through the invisible lattice that bound every Aurelian mind in that hall, one to the next, a hush moved outward like a ring on water, and where it passed, the laughter died. By the time it reached the back of the hall, no one could quite remember what had been funny. Scarlett felt it too. She turned, her clever final remark still balanced on her tongue like a knife on a fingertip, and met her mother's gaze and hesitated, which she never did. The Queen spoke first. "He will be your husband." The words did not shout. They did not need to. The hall was grown from crystal that remembered everything, and it took those 4 small syllables and passed them wall to wall and back again in a long silver shiver, so that they seemed to come from every direction at once, from the floor and the drifting lights and the throne and the terrible quiet air. "He will be your husband. He will be your husband." Scarlett froze mid-sentence. The knife fell off her tongue and vanished somewhere unmentionable. She stood on the mirrored floor with her reflection staring up at her in equal disbelief, and for one whole heartbeat, the most articulate woman in the Aurelian court produced no sound at all. "I'm sorry," she said finally, and her voice had gone strange and small. Mother, I misheard you. Say it again, and I'll have misheard it differently." The Queen did not say it again. She did not need to. She simply held her daughter's eyes and offered no explanation, and let the silence do the arguing. And the silence was very persuasive, because behind it was the whole immovable weight of a mother who had decided something and would not be moved from it, though the sky come down in pieces. And Robert, who had stood through an hour of her scorn without so much as raising his voice, who had ironed his coat and hoped for the best and endured the rest, turned his head, slowly, and looked at the girl who had spent the entire evening making a joke of him. He looked at her the way you look at a door you have just been told leads somewhere you had never planned to go. Not unkindly, but not simply either, with new eyes and a great many complicated things happening behind them. Scarlett looked back, humiliated and reeling, the laughter of the court still ringing faintly in the crystal above her, and understood 2 things at once. The first was that the man she had treated as an amusement was now, somehow, bound up in the whole of her future. The second, and the worse, was that she had no idea in the reach of the galaxy why. Scarlett did not sleep. She had, in fairness, made a genuine attempt at it, lying in the dark and constructing increasingly elaborate arguments to deliver to her mother, each one more devastating than the last, each one demolishing the Queen's position so thoroughly that the Queen would have no choice but to apologize, laugh, and confess it had all been a jest in poor taste. By the 3rd hour, she had won this argument 14 times. By the 5th, she had begun to suspect that winning an argument in the dark against a person who is asleep and does not know you are arguing with them is not, in the strictest sense, winning. She rose before the light shoals had finished drifting to their morning depths, dressed without her attendants, and went to have the argument for real. The Queen's private chambers were guarded by 2 members of the Silent Watch, who parted without a word, which was their entire job and which they did beautifully. Inside, her mother was already awake, seated by the tall window with a cup of steaming something, and she looked up at her daughter's entrance with the mild, unhurried expression of a woman who has been expecting a storm and has already put away anything breakable. "You didn't sleep," the Queen observed. "I don't intend to sleep again until you tell me what possessed you." Scarlett crossed the room in a manner she hoped conveyed cold fury, and probably conveyed a young woman who had not slept. "In front of the entire court, Mother. The entire court. Lord Ficition was there. Lord Ficition tells everyone everything. By now 3 moons have heard that the crown princess is to be married off to a mammal in a brown coat who irons his own clothing. He does iron it very neatly. Mother." The Queen sipped her something. "Sit down, Scarlett." "I will not sit down. Sitting is what one does when one has accepted a situation. I have accepted nothing." She sat down. It was a very comfortable chair, and she was extremely tired, and one has to choose one's battles. Why him? Of all the beings in the Reach, why the human? Why that human? Give me a reason, and I will consider being reasonable about it, which is more than the reason will deserve. And here her mother did a thing that Scarlett would puzzle over for a long time afterward. She opened her mouth to answer, and then, quite deliberately, closed it again. Not the closing of someone who has no answer. The closing of someone who has one, and has decided you are not ready to hold it. In time, the Queen said. Not this morning. That is not an explanation. No, it is a promise of one, which is what you're getting. She set down the cup. Tell me, last night, in the hall, you stood in the middle of 600 nobles, and you felt the room, the way you always feel a room, the way we all do. Every mind in the weave, brushing against every other, all evening long, the amusement, the boredom, Lord Ficition composing his gossip before the joke had even finished. You felt all of it. Scarlett frowned because this was true, and she did not see where it was going. From the day an Aurelian child's ears finished growing, the weave was simply there, the low, constant murmur of every other mind in reach, a lattice of felt things, not thoughts exactly, but the weather of thoughts, so that no Aurelian was ever truly alone, and no Aurelian ever quite got away with anything. Of course I felt it. What of it? And the envoy, said her mother. Robert. When you turned your wit on him over and over for an hour and a quarter, what did you feel from him? Scarlett opened her mouth. Then she stopped. Because the honest answer, the one that arrived unbidden and made the back of her neck go cold, was nothing. Not calm. Not stillness. Not the careful blankness of someone shielding themselves. Nothing at all. A hole in the murmur of the room. A seat at the table where no one sat. A silence so complete she had mistaken it all evening for the man simply being dull. She had been shouting into a well and calling the well stupid for not shouting back. He's not in the weave, she said slowly. Humans aren't in the weave. No, said her mother. They're not. And she picked up her cup again and would say nothing further, and that, infuriatingly, was that. Robert, meanwhile, had been installed in the East residence, a suite of rooms so grand that he had spent his first morning in it apologizing to the furniture. He apologized to a chaise he bumped, then apologized to himself for apologizing, then explained the whole matter to the small, hovering drone at his shoulder, which had accompanied him from Earth, and which possessed a voice of flawless diplomatic neutrality and the soul, if it had one, of a disappointed accountant. You are aware, said the drone, that they can hear you. The walls report. Then the walls know I'm sorry, said Robert. He was making tea. He had brought his own leaves, correctly anticipating that a civilization capable of growing a cathedral from a plum pit would nonetheless have no idea what to do with a kettle. How am I doing, diplomatically, on a scale of 1 to interstellar incident? You have been betrothed to the crown princess within 9 hours of arrival, said the drone, which is either the greatest diplomatic triumph in the history of Earth or a catastrophe of a kind our language has no word for. I am gathering data before I commit. It was at this point that the door announced a visitor, and the visitor did not wait to be admitted. He entered on a tide of silk and quiet, a tall Aurelian of middle years, with a face arranged into precisely the amount of warmth protocol required, and not 1 degree more. His ears were hung with thin chains of pale metal that chimed when he moved, which meant he moved rarely and only for effect. Envoy Robert, said the man, with a bow calibrated to the last hair. I am Adrian, Chancellor of the Court. I confess I have come out of the most vulgar curiosity, for which I hope you'll forgive me. I simply had to see the man our queen values so highly that she would spend her only daughter to keep him. He smiled. It was a very good smile. I do wonder what she sees in you. I mean that, of course, as the warmest of welcomes. Of course, said Robert, and poured a second cup. Tea? The trouble with a royal betrothal, Scarlett discovered, is that it is not a decision, but a machine. Once set in motion, it grinds forward on rails laid down 10,000 years ago, and it does not care in the slightest whether the bride would rather be anywhere else in the observable universe, including inside a collapsing star. There were the 9 presentations. There was the walking of the bounds. There was a ceremony, older than the crystal hall itself, that required the betrothed pair to stand together upon the petitioner's stone and be looked at by the assembled court for a period the protocol described as sufficient, a word chosen, Scarlett was certain, by someone who hated joy. She had resolved to endure all of it in glacial silence. This resolution lasted until roughly the middle of the second presentation, when Robert, standing beside her under the weight of 600 staring nobles, murmured out of the side of his mouth, "Is it rude to ask what we're presenting? I've been holding this cushion for 20 minutes and I've grown quite attached to it. I'd like to know if I'm giving it away." "It is the cushion of accord," Scarlett hissed. "It represents the mutual comfort of the joined houses." "It's a very nice cushion," Robert allowed. "Bit small for actual comfort, more of a symbolic sit." And Scarlett, to her genuine horror, felt the corner of her mouth attempt to move in a direction she had not authorized. She crushed the rebellion at once. But it had happened, and they both knew it had happened, and the small, dry gleam in the human's eye told her he was going to be absolutely insufferable about having caused it. This was the pattern over the days that followed, and she resented the pattern deeply. She would arrange some elegant coldness, some remark honed to a killing edge, and launch it, and it would sail clean through the space where a wounded man's feelings ought to be and strike nothing because the man simply declined to be wounded. He answered her sharpest cuts with a mildness that was not stupidity. She had begun to understand, and not weakness either, but something she had no name for and did not entirely trust. The calm of a person who had already survived worse than a princess in a bad mood and knew the difference. It was, she thought bitterly, extremely hard to feel powerful while insulting someone who kept offering you tea. What unsettled her more was the silence of him. In every ritual they stood shoulder to shoulder, and all around her surged the familiar tide of the weave, the boredom of the back rows, the sly calculations of Lord Ficition, the low collective hum of a court that felt itself feeling, and there, at her very elbow, a hole in all of it, a quiet so total it had its own gravity. She had spent her whole life inside the murmur of other minds. Standing next to a mind that made no sound at all was like standing at the edge of a cliff. You did not fall, but some animal part of you never stopped knowing you could. The accident happened on the 9th day during the rehearsal of the walking of the bounds. The bounds were walked along the upper gallery, a slender bridge of grown crystal that arched across the throne hall 100 feet above the mirrored floor, unrailed by tradition because the ancient Aurelians had considered railings an insult to one's sense of balance and, presumably, had lost a great many ancient Aurelians proving it. Scarlett had walked it 100 times. She walked it now with her chin high and her attention entirely occupied by composing something withering about the human's footwear, which is why she did not notice the anchor glyph beneath the third span dim and gutter, the small woven sigil that held that section of the bridge rigid against the hall's slow crystalline sway. She felt the floor go soft under her foot. She felt the whole span begin, with dreamlike slowness, to tilt. And here is the thing she would turn over in her mind for many nights after. In the instant the bridge gave way, the entire court felt it through the weave, and the weave did the worst possible thing. It did not panic. A single mind, somewhere below, moving with terrible skill, poured calm into the lattice, a smooth gray wash of all is well, nothing is wrong, do not move, and 600 nobles received it and obeyed it, standing serene and lovely and useless while their princess pitched sideways off a bridge 100 feet in the air. Every mind in the hall was told to be still, except one which no message could reach. Robert was already moving before she began to fall, because the false calm that had frozen the room had washed straight past him without so much as slowing down, and so he was the only creature in the whole shining hall for whom the sight of a bridge collapsing meant precisely what a bridge collapsing means. His hand closed around her wrist. His other arm hooked the base of a standing pillar glyph, one of the few still lit, and the two of them swung hard against it as the third span peeled away beneath them and fell and struck the mirror floor far below. and did not so much shatter as ring, an enormous mournful bell note that rolled through the hall and, at last, broke the spell. The weave erupted into the delayed screaming it should have started with. They hung there a moment. Scarlett's wrist in Robert's grip, her weight against the pillar, her heart doing something entirely new and unwelcome. He was not even breathing hard. He looked at her with those steady, silent, unreadable eyes and said, in a tone of the mildest possible inquiry, "Still think I'm dull?" "You may consider," she managed, the question suspended. Later, hauled up, wrapped in someone's cloak, shaking in a way she was furious about, she looked across the hall and found her mother. The queen had risen from the throne and was gripping its arm, and for one unguarded instant before the royal mask came down, Scarlett saw two things she had never seen there. The first was terror. The second, worse, was a fine, helpless tremor running through the queen's raised hand. The hand of a woman much older and much more tired than the woman who had spoken 4 words in that hall 10 days before. Then the queen straightened, and the tremor was gone, as though it had never been, and Scarlett was left wondering how long her mother had been hiding it, and from whom, and why. They found each other that night on the East Terrace, which neither of them would afterward admit to having gone looking for the other, though both had. Scarlett arrived first, still wearing the borrowed cloak, unable to stay in her rooms, where the walls remembered her shaking. Robert came out perhaps an hour later, carrying 2 cups, and did not comment on her presence, and did not leave, and this, the not commenting, undid something in her that all his wit had failed to reach. "You should be asleep," she said, because attack was familiar and safe. "So should you. We could take turns being reasonable. You go first." She took the cup. It was the tea. She had privately decided some days ago that the tea was the single genuinely civilized thing to arrive from Earth, and had told no one, and intended to tell no one, and drank it now, looking pointedly at the moons so she would not have to look at him. "Why do you let me do it?" she said at last. "The things I say to you. Anyone else would have struck back by now, or wept, or written to their government. You just stand there, being irritatingly whole about it." Robert was quiet for a while. Below them, the sleeping city breathed its soft blue light. "I had a wife," he said eventually. In the plain way he said everything. "On Earth. Her name was Elena. We had 11 years, which wasn't enough, and then a shuttle came down over the Kesk Straits with her on it. And after that I had a great deal of time to learn what an insult actually costs." He turned the cup in his hands. "It turns out the answer is almost nothing. When you've paid the real price for something, the counterfeit stops frightening you. Your cruelty is very fine work, Princess. Genuinely, top of its class. But it's counterfeit, and I think somewhere you know that, and I think that's why you keep spending it. Because you're hoping one of these times it'll come out real, and then you'll finally feel something." Scarlett stood very still. On any other night she would have had 6 replies. She had none. The silence of him had somehow gotten inside her, and in it she heard, with awful clarity, the truth of what he'd said. "It was a boy," she heard herself say. "When I was young, a visiting lord's son. I loved him the way you love at that age, with your whole chest and no sense at all, and I let him see all of it, every soft thing, and he took it back to court and made it a game. For a season the whole weave laughed at me. Everyone. I could feel them laughing all at once everywhere I went." She swallowed. "So I learned to be the one who laughs first. It's not a good reason, but it's the one I have." "It's a real reason," said Robert. "That's more than most people manage." They did not speak for a while, and it was not an awkward silence, which was itself a small astonishment. Something had shifted, quiet as a tide turning, and both of them felt it, and neither was fool enough to name it out loud and frighten it off. It was there, in that softened quiet, that the queen found them. She came alone, without the watch, moving slowly, and when the terrace light caught her, Scarlett saw again the thing from the throne, the tremor, no longer hidden, running through her mother now like a current through failing wire. The queen sat because she plainly needed to, and looked at the two of them, and made her decision. I owe you the explanation I promised, she said. Both of you. I have put it off because once you know it, you cannot unknow it, and it is a heavy thing to carry. But I am running out of time to be gentle about the timing. She folded her trembling hands. I am dying, Scarlett. It is a sickness of the weave itself. The lattice that binds us also wears us, and mine has worn through. I have perhaps a season, perhaps less. Scarlett's cup slipped and did not quite fall. Mother, let me finish, while I still make sense of an evening. The Queen's voice was steady, even as her hands were not. The weave is our glory, and it is our open door. For 100 years there has been a power beyond the border, the Sarn, who covet what we are and cannot conquer it by fleet, because you cannot besiege a thing you'd rather own intact. So they learned the subtler road. They learned to reach into the lattice, to touch an Aurelian mind and turn it softly, like a key, and the mind never knows, because in the weave, a borrowed feeling and a true one wear the same face. She looked at her daughter. The calm that froze the hall while you fell. That was not an accident of protocol. That was a hand, reaching in, using our greatest gift to hold 600 of us still while you died. Someone in this court belongs to them. I have known it for a year. I have not been able to find them. Because to hunt a mind through the weave is to reveal your own. And the moment I look too hard, they feel me looking. And Robert, Scarlett said slowly, the whole shape of it rising in front of her. He's not in the weave. They can't touch him. They can't turn him. And they can't feel him coming. On the night in the hall, the Queen said, while every mind around me churned with your cruelty and their laughter, his was the only silence in 600 souls, the one place in the room the enemy could not reach and could not read. A consort no key can turn, married into the blood, standing at the center of the throne, an anchor, child, the single thing they cannot corrupt. Her tired eyes moved between them, and something in them softened past all her queenship. I did not choose him to punish you. I chose him because he is the one wall in this palace they cannot climb, that it might also make you happy. The tremor took her hand, and she let it. I confess, I permitted myself to hope. Who? Robert said very quietly. Not mild now. Something under the mildness, cold and level. Who is the hand? The Queen met his eyes. His ears chime when he moves, she said, so that he need never move quickly. He came to your rooms on the first morning to measure the one man he could not measure any other way. She drew a slow breath. The Chancellor, Adrian, and he now knows exactly what you are, which means he knows you are the only thing standing between him and everything he has spent a year building. He will not wait much longer. Adrian did not wait at all as it happened. He moved on the night of the betrothal feast, which was clever of him, because a feast is the one occasion on which 600 nobles gather in a single hall with their minds pleasantly loosened by wine and ceremony and the low, warm hum of shared celebration, a lattice already softened, already open, waiting like a lock for the right key. Scarlett would think afterward that he had probably always intended it for this night. The whole betrothal had been to him merely the gathering of a very large and very well-dressed weapon into one convenient room. It began as a feeling. Scarlett, seated beside Robert at the high table, felt the weave do something she had never felt it do. A long, smooth drawing in, as though the whole murmuring sea of the hall's minds were being gently gathered up and combed in a single direction, like reeds under a slow current. The laughter faded. The conversations trailed off, one table after another, not in alarm but in a dreadful contentment, 600 faces going slack and serene and turned, all of them, toward the great doors, where the Chancellor now stood with his chains of pale metal utterly silent, because for once he had no need to move for effect. "He's in the lattice," Scarlett breathed. "He's in all of them at once. Mother said he couldn't hold that many." "Your mother said he couldn't hold that many without help," said Robert, already on his feet. "I think we're looking at the help." The silent watch turned. Every one of them, as one, drew their blades, and faced the high table with the calm, courteous, empty faces of men being worn like gloves. Lord Ficition rose from his seat and smiled the smile of a man who was no longer entirely home behind his own eyes. The entire glittering court came to its feet in one smooth motion, a wave of borrowed purpose, and began, unhurried, to close in. "Robert," said the drone, hovering at his shoulder, "I feel I should note, for the record I am transmitting to Earth, that this is a catastrophe of the kind our language has no word for. I have found the word. The word is this. What saved them, in the first terrible minute, was the thing Scarlett had spent 9 days resenting. The false serenity that swamped the hall. The gray drowning tide of all is well. Be still. Come and be gathered. Poured over every mind present and broke, wholly and completely against the one mind it could not enter. Robert stood in the center of that current like a stone in a flood, untouched, unturned, seeing exactly what was happening because nothing was permitted to tell him otherwise. And Scarlett, clutching his arm, found that where she touched him, the tide thinned. His silence had an edge, and in the shelter of it, her own mind cleared, just enough, just barely, to remember that she was Scarlett and not a reed. "Stay against me," he said. "Whatever he pushes into you, you can feel where it's coming from. It has a seam. Hunt the seam." They went down off the dais together, into a hall of beautiful sleepwalking friends, and it was the worst kind of fighting because there was no one to strike. Every hand raised against them belonged to someone who would weep to know it. Robert did not strike them. He moved them, turned their momentum, opened doors in the closing crowd, and shut them again. An anchor threading a current, and everywhere his hand fell for even an instant a mind surfaced, gasped, blinked free, and staggered out of the trance, appalled. "You realize," Scarlett said, ducking a watchman's dreamlike blade, hauling the man off his balance by a shoulder so that Robert's passing touch could wake him, "that if we survive this, I have said a truly unforgivable number of cruel things to the one person in the galaxy currently keeping me alive. I've been keeping a list." "Of course you have. It's a short list. I stopped adding to it about 4 days ago." He said it plainly, in the middle of catastrophe, not looking at her, and she felt it land somewhere the counterfeit had never reached. "For what it's worth. Now when we get to the middle of the hall, I need you to stop hunting the seam and start hunting him. You can't reach Adrian, but you can reach the 600 he's holding, and I can hold you still while you do it, which is the one thing he can't stop, because he can't touch me, and I'm touching you." She understood then exactly what he was offering to be. The fixed point. The still stone she could brace against while she reached back up the current, past every hijacked mind, to the hand at the top of it. "That will show him everything I am," she said. "The way Mother said, he'll feel me the instant I look." "Then look fast," said Robert, "and I'll keep you standing." They reached the center of the hall, on the great mirror where a bridge had once fallen, and Scarlett stopped fighting and closed her eyes and let herself go up into the drowning tide. And it nearly took her, the sheer roaring weight of 600 gathered minds, and would have, except that around her wrist was a grip that no message could soften and no calm could loosen. A silence that said, "Here, here, this is real. Come back to this." She braced on him, and she followed the current up, past Ficition, past the watch, past 100 sleeping lords, to its source, and seized it, and turned. Across the hall, Adrian's serene face broke. For the first time in a year, the hunter was seen. He flung the whole weight of the lattice at her at once to throw her off, and she staggered, and did not fall, because she could not fall, because someone was holding her up. And into that half-second of his fury, the queen struck. She had come quietly through the great doors behind him, spending the last of a dying woman's strength, and she reached into the breach he had torn open and closed it around him like a fist closing on its own key, sealing the current, sealing the enemy inside the very lattice he had used as a weapon. And the whole vast, borrowed spell collapsed inward, and 600 minds woke screaming into their own skulls, and the Chancellor of Aureli dropped where he stood and did not rise. The Queen sank slowly to the floor. She was smiling. It cost her everything she had left, and she spent it gladly, and she did not once look sorry. The Queen did not die that night, which surprised everyone, most of all the Queen. Sealing the breach had cost her the last strength she had been hoarding, but it had also done something the court physicians spent a great many baffled days failing to explain, and eventually agreed to call a miracle so they could stop being asked about it. In closing the wound Adrian had torn in the lattice, she had closed, too, the older, slower wound that had been wearing her thin for a year. The sickness of the weave, it turned out, had not been a natural fraying at all. It had been Adrian all along. A thread of him worked so patiently and so finely into the Queen's own mind that neither she nor anyone else had ever felt it as anything but age and exhaustion. He had been killing her the way he did everything, softly, so that she might die on a schedule of his choosing and leave a young, untried princess on the throne with a friendly chancellor at her elbow. When the Queen's fist closed on him and cut him out of the lattice entire, she cut him out of herself as well. The tremor left her hands within a fortnight. She was, she remarked, deeply annoyed to have wasted a whole season composing farewell speeches. Adrian himself lived, which was its own kind of justice. Aurelian law had no death penalty. It had something the Aurelians considered worse, and the humans found frankly horrifying, which was that a mind convicted of turning the weave against its own people was severed from the lattice forever, left whole, left healthy, left utterly and permanently alone in the one civilization in the reach of the galaxy where no one is ever alone. He would live out a long life in a silence he had inflicted on others and never once had to feel himself. Scarlett attended the sentencing and found, to her own quiet surprise, that she pitied him. She said as much to Robert afterward. He spent his whole life reaching into other people, she said, and now he'll spend the rest of it unable to reach anyone at all. It's a human sort of loneliness, Robert said. You'll get used to it about the time you stop needing to. The Sarn, deprived of their single laborious foothold and their year of careful work, and having learned that the Aurelian throne now sat behind a wall they could neither read nor turn, elected, as bullies do when the arithmetic stops flattering them, to become suddenly and enormously interested in a peace treaty. Earth's envoy was asked to help draft it. The drone described this development. For the record, it was transmitting home as the greatest diplomatic triumph in the history of Earth, and then, after a pause, added, I have committed. It only took an interstellar conspiracy and one collapsing bridge. But that was all the tidying up of nations, and it is not, in the end, what the story was about. The story was about a decree spoken in a crystal hall, and so it was to the crystal hall that the two of them returned, some weeks later, on a quiet evening with no court in it at all. I have thought about how to say this, the Queen told them, and I find the honest way is the shortest. She looked at her daughter. I release you, Scarlett, from the decree, entirely and without condition. Scarlett went very still. The betrothal was never a chain, the Queen went on. It was a wall, a thing to put between you and an enemy who could reach into your very heart and turn it against itself. I could not let them choose for you, so I chose a man they could not touch, and I put him beside you. And I told a crowded hall he would be your husband, so that no power in the weave could ever whisper you out of it. But the wall has done its work. Adrian is severed, the Sarn are suing for peace, and the thing I was protecting, your own heart, your own choosing, is yours again, free and clear. You owe this man nothing. You may thank him for your life, and send him home to Earth with the treaty and my everlasting gratitude, and no one, least of all your mother, will think one unkind thought of you for it. She folded her steady hands. I forced a beginning on you because I had to. I will not force the rest. What happens now is yours. And there it was. The one thing Scarlett had wanted since the morning after the decree, the freedom to walk away with her pride intact and her future her own, handed to her at last, with love. She turned to Robert. He was watching her with those steady, silent, unreadable eyes, except that she could read them now, she found. Somewhere in the last weeks she had learned the language of him the way she'd never had to learn anyone, because he was the one person she'd ever met. She had to actually look at to know. There was no expectation in his face. He would go, if she said, go. That was the worst and best of it, that the going was genuinely on offer. "You know what's strange," she said, and her voice was not quite steady, and for once she let it not be. "For 20 years the weave told me what everyone in a room was feeling, and I never trusted a word of it, because a borrowed feeling wears the same face as a true one. You taught me that, and here you are, the one mind I have never been able to feel at all, and you're the only person I have ever been completely certain about." She stepped toward him. "I could send you home. She's right, I could, and no one would blame me. But I've spent my whole life laughing first so that nothing could ever be real. And I am so tired of counterfeit, Robert. I want the real thing, even though it costs more. Especially because it costs more." "That," said Robert, "is the least dull thing you've ever said to me." "Marry me," said Scarlett. "You insufferable tea-brewing, bridge-catching, coat-ironing man. Not because my mother said so, because I'm saying so." "I ironed it again this morning," Robert said, "in case you were about to ask. And in the great crystal hall of Aureli, the walls that remembered every word ever spoken against them took those and kept them too, and the whole court, packed into the gallery, because a court cannot be kept out of anything, fell silent. But this time it was the other silence, the full one, the one that comes not from a stone dropped in still water, but from 600 people declining, all at once, to breathe, for fear of spoiling something. The drone, appointed to officiate on the grounds that it was the only party present neither Aurelian nor prone to weeping, cleared a throat it did not possess. The queen, whose hands did not tremble, watched her daughter choose, freely, at last and well, and found that after all her careful speeches, she had nothing left to say but the oldest thing a mother has, which needs no lattice and no crystal, and no words at all to carry, and which Scarlett, for the first time in her life, felt arrive plain and true and entirely her own. There is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. Scarlett grew up in a sea of other minds, never once out of earshot of another heart, and she was the loneliest person in that whole shining palace, because she had learned, young and hard, that the safest thing to do with a feeling is to mock it before anyone else can, that if you laugh first, nothing can ever laugh at you. And it works. It keeps you safe. It also keeps you empty, and the terrible bargain of it is that you rarely notice the difference until someone stands beside you, perfectly quiet, and refuses to be frightened by your cruelty, and you realize you've been shouting into a well for years, calling it stupid, when the truth was that you were simply afraid of what an honest answer might cost. The man who saved her never once tried to out-argue her. He just declined to bleed on cue because he had already paid the real price for love and knew the counterfeit when he saw it. And maybe that is the quiet thing this whole story was trying to say, that the people who can weather our sharpest edges are usually the ones who have already been broken somewhere we can't see, and that armor, however fine, however clever, is still just a wall we build against the very thing we're dying to be given. So here is what's worth sitting with, after the lights come up. Who taught you to laugh first? And what did it cost you to learn? How much of what you call feeling is borrowed, handed to you by the room, the crowd, the current everyone else is caught in, and how much of it is truly, stubbornly your own? And if someone offered you the door tonight, the clean exit, the chance to keep your pride and walk away untouched, would you take it? Or would you finally do the far more frightening thing, and stay, and choose the real one, precisely because it costs more? The weave could tell them what everyone was feeling. It could never tell them what was true. Neither, in the end, can anything but the courage to stop performing and let ourselves be seen. Scarlett spent 20 years making certain nothing could ever be real. The question the story leaves in your hands is a simple one and a hard one And it is not about her at all. How much longer will you? The end. We've reached the end of the story, friends. Before we leave, I have a request for you. Please press the like button. Leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next story. See you in another story. Goodbye, friends.